Welcome to our series on Marx. In this series of lecture, we're going to talk about his critique of capitalism. But in order to understand that, we need to look at his theory of what humans are as a species, and therefore how human nature is fulfilled. In other words, how we as humans find happiness. Okay? So now the most important thing about Marx is, like many other modern philosophers, he believes the essence of all life is activity. What makes humans different from other animals is not only do we act or strive for things, but we do it self-consciously for goals. That's very important. So let's use a concrete example. Let's say, for example, that I am someone who wants to complete my college degree. Well, what does that mean? That means that I envision that college degree and I envision myself, a future state of myself and the world. And in that, I have my actual self as I am now, say without a college degree, and the future self. But that future self doesn't exist yet. It's an idea only in my mind. And as a subject, as someone who's conscious, I'm able to have that in my mind. But what that does is produces this divide between my actual self and the idea of my future self. This divide, I'm striving to overcome. How do I do that? Well, by activity. But when this activity is self-conscious, I'm working for something. Therefore, I'm laboring to produce a new state of myself and the world. And this production involves making the world different, making myself different. Well, who am I? I'm this physical organism. The world is this physical environment. And so I'm striving to change the physical environment into something that's objectively new. Thus, I overcome the divide by bringing this idea into a state of objective reality. And that is what I would call fulfillment. And so when I complete that degree and I get, say, a 4.0 average and I'm valedictorian, then I feel this tremendous pride in my accomplishment because I see objectively exemplified, made into an objective reality, the idea that I strove for. There it is, right before me. Here I am, right before myself, visible to my senses where I get my knowledge, this new state of self. And therefore, I have imprinted or stamped the reality of myself onto the world and my power. This I've done through what? Through my labor, through my production. And so what I've done is by producing something, a product in the world, I have made the world and this sphere of mine into something that is my own, the product of my labor. So what you see in Marx is the essence of human fulfillment is this idea of fulfilling labor. Labor is the essence of what makes humans human. And production is that objective bringing into reality of that power that we only see as something subjective, an idea, until we have this self-mastery of bringing it into our existence and making it our own. So those of you who think that Marx is against private property, you're wrong. He sees the essence of human fulfillment is making the world our own. The difference is what capitalism does to private property, and therefore what it does to human labor. It produces a process which we're going to call alienation. Now we have originally always in our striving this divide, this alienation in a sense between ourself as we actually are and what we want to become. But as long as we have control of our labor, then we're always able to overcome that divide to a certain extent and therefore imprint and stamp the world with our mastery, with our power. It is when we become alienated from our labor that we are unable to fulfill ourselves. And therefore we then bring in useful illusions of what we want in our ideal world and try to make those ideas real through what he calls religion. But we'll get to that later on. The key here is this, is once we see that human fulfillment is in unity with our activity and our labor, then what we see also is how and in what sense capitalism can destroy that. Let me read you a passage here in one of his works on John Stuart Mill to kind of get you that idea of what he's talking about with fulfillment. And let me load this here. There we go. Okay. So Marx says, let us suppose that we have carried out production as human beings. We've carried it out. Each of us would have, in two ways, affirmed himself and the other person. One, in my production, I would have objectified my individuality. In other words, I would have made my individuality into something specific and physical. Its special character, and therefore enjoyed not only as an individual manifestation in my life during the activity, but also when looking at the object, I would have the individual pleasure of knowing my personality to be objective, to be real, visible to the senses, and hence a power beyond all doubt. And number two, in your enjoyment or use of my product, I would have the direct enjoyment both of being conscious of having satisfied a human need by my work, that is, of having objectified man's essential conscious nature, and having thus created an object corresponding to the need of man's essence. Our products would be so many mirrors in which we saw reflected our essential nature, and thus we become even more self-conscious through making our subjective idea in our head into a reality that's outside of us and that's beholdable to our senses. So in our next installment, we will talk about how capitalism causes this process, short-circuits this process of self-fulfillment for the worker.